Alright, so we are on today 92 of going through my old journal entries, and the quote for today is, "There's more of life than being a passenger." And then the prompt says, "What about your life makes you feel like a passenger instead of the driver?" So if you're following along, just maybe pause the video and take a minute to think about your response, and I will read you what mine was. So let's see, day 92. I said, "For the most part, I feel like the driver. I'm more or less free to do whatever I want, even though I sometimes feel a bit locked down by my job or school." So yeah, again, that's how I've been feeling for like the last couple of years. I know I could quit if I really wanted to, and thankfully I have a background as far as education and work experience that should probably allow me to get another job if I needed to. I also feel like I'm in control over my relationship with my partner at the time, or at least I don't feel like he has control over me. Yeah, our relationship is pretty complicated, but I've never felt like I wasn't like somewhat in control. Because if I did feel that way, then I wouldn't keep a relationship with someone. If I felt like they were trying to control me, that's definitely one thing that I wouldn't put up with. Let's see, I lost my place. We both been pretty open about our feelings for one another. Even if things aren't perfect, at least we have an understanding that allows me quite a bit of control over things. I can't wait to be finished with school so I can have more freedom and quit my job. But I'm the only one who's ultimately holding myself back. I need to find the motivation from somewhere to just get it done. And yeah, I'm feeling a lot better in terms of work and school right now. And my job isn't even necessarily something that I would like quit. Like, I think I've mentioned this, my job is kind of weird. It's not like, I don't know, jobs in academia are kind of weird. My job's not a secure job. It's kind of like we get funding from year to year. And so I kind of like that aspect, because I feel like if I wanted to quit, I would just have to give like a notice, and you know, like I don't feel like I'm locked into my job, but at the same time I am kind of locked into my job, because if I want to finish school, I need to stick with this job because they're kind of tied together, and my tuition is covered. So, and I like working different types of jobs, and so this is probably the most ideal job for me, because we're always having different projects, and so it's not just I'm working on one thing, doing the same thing every day, because I've realized over the years that I get really bored with that. I think that's part of the reason why I wonder if ADHD is more prevalent among people who are servers or people who are customer service workers. Just because I feel like when you're a server or a customer service worker, or, you know, working in like guest facing jobs, that every day is kind of like different. Like it's, you never know what to expect when you're dealing with people. So like when I worked at Disney, I enjoyed that because it's, you know, you're doing the same thing, but it's something different every day. And honestly, the way Disney like has, or at least had when I worked there, their like system set up was like, it's almost like they made it for people with ADHD, because you don't stay, even if you're at one location, like one attraction, you don't stay at the same position. Like you don't get hired and just trained to be like the person that pushes the button to run the ride or the person that loads people. You learn all of the positions and you rotate. Like they have this computer system that will come and bump you. You spend like an hour or two typically at the most in one position, and then you get bumped. So it kind of, I mean, thinking about it now, like that's probably why I enjoyed working at Disney so much, was because it's always new people, new guests coming through. They always had new like workers coming in because you know, they had their full-time and part-time people, but then they had staggered like entries of like college program kids. So like, anyway, I'm going too much detail, but I think that's what kept it interesting for me, because even it's like the international kids would come in different waves. So like all the US college kids would be at one time, and then you would have like certain countries, they would come and stay for 2 months at a time. So you were just always like around new people, around new cultures, and yeah, I mean, they were exploiting us for our labor for like pretty cheap, but, and I hate that aspect of it. But I feel like I gained a lot personally, which is probably kind of selfish because it probably put like the full-timers and part-timers at a disadvantage. But at the time I wasn't thinking about that, and nobody made me feel that way. So it seemed like most of the full-time and part-time people like embraced the college kids, because I think they would work as the shifts that most of them didn't want to work. But anyway, as far as like taking the lead on my life, I feel like even though I did for like a year or two feel pretty like stuck in my job and school, there was always kind of that underpinning of like, I have the option to quit. I would love to get a PhD. I would love to reach like this pinnacle of higher education, but I knew that if I didn't follow through, I would still be okay. And that kind of gave me like a sense of security. And going back to my relationship, one thing that I liked about that relationship was I didn't feel like it would ever be a problem if I told him to go away. And I think I fear that a lot because of seeing my mom and my dad's relationship. He kind of put my mom in a position where he gave her, and I've been in this position too, like when I was younger, a couple of relationships where, you know, I knew that I wanted to break up. I knew I wasn't happy in the relationship, but it was just really hard to, like, the person I was with didn't make it easy to break up with them. You know, like, you can tell them that you're not happy and you don't want to be in the relationship, but it's almost like they don't care about like how you feel. They want to be in a relationship with you. And so they'll, you know, beg you to stay and all this stuff. And there's been times that I felt that pressure to kind of like stay. And even though I knew I wasn't happy, I, you know, verbalized and tried to let them know that I wasn't happy, but they just kind of made it hard for me and made me feel guilty. And with this person, it's kind of like I knew I would, and my dad just like made my mom's life just terrible whenever she tried to leave him. And ultimately she didn't leave him because he made it so hard that she ended up staying, because it was just easier to stay and be unhappy than to try to leave. And so I definitely have a fear of getting stuck into a relationship like that. But yeah, and then there was even a past relationship where, or I don't know, you know, you go through that period where you're really into the person, and so like moving in together seems like it's a good idea, you know, because you're like, well, we're spending time at each other's places all the time, like why not move in with each other? And then I feel trapped in that way because I'm like, well, we're living together, you know, like what do we do about splitting up because we're living together? And so with that relationship, there wasn't that either. Like, we were kind of living together, but we each had our own place. Like, I'm not willing to ever give up like my own place again. I guess is what I'm trying to say. Like, if I was gonna like live with someone, I would still keep my own place. And thankfully I have like my grandma's house to kind of be that place to always kind of have if I need, so I don't feel trapped in that sense. So yeah, like I don't see a situation going forward, you know, unless it's just like some huge like global or, you know, situation um where I don't really have control at this point. I feel like I have pretty good control of my life, but that's a little bit scary because I feel like there's just too many choices of what to do, and I think I worry about like making the wrong choice because I do have control. If you don't have control, to some extent it's a little bit easier because it's just kind of like, well, okay, I'm going to do this, 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 and this. This is what's laid out for me. This is what I'm going to do. But for me, I've always felt like I've had like all the anything in the world that I wanted to do, which is great, but also it's leads to a little bit of anxiety and stress of like, what do they call it, choice fatigue, where you have too many choices and so you're stressed that you might make the wrong choice. But thankfully I typically tend to just make a choice and just go with it. So once I make the choice, it's really not too bad. But yeah, my roommate is kind of going through that a little bit because up until a few years ago, he was kind of one of those that just like was just kind of going with the flow, didn't really have a whole lot of control. His dad had worked at a factory, and so that was like the path that he was going, was just work at a factory, which there's nothing wrong with working at a factory. I mean, the pay is not too bad, and the place that he worked was really nice, but he didn't know that there were other options, or that there were other options available to him. And so that was what he was going to do, work at the factory until he retired, and then, you know, at some point start a family and have kids. But, you know, things have kind of changed. He had some opportunities come around to kind of like break him out of that, and he's taken advantage of that. And you know, that's the same way with me. I could have gone the same path as my mom and work at a corporate job for, you know, my whole life and retire from there. And I even worked at the place that my mom had worked as a student worker. And I just despised the thought of that for a while. I was in that thinking of like, oh, the 9 to 5 is so terrible. But I'm glad that I went to school and worked all these other jobs to get like the background that I have. But sometimes I just think like, just a steady 9 to 5 would not be that bad. But I think if I hadn't done all of these other things, all of these other jobs, I don't think that I would have been happy to just go into that 9 to 5 without knowing. I think in that sense, I would have always wondered, well, what if? And it's the same thing about, like, I'm rambling, I know, but me and my roommate were talking about it the other day of like, he said he gets people asking him all the time, like, well, you know, you live in Arkansas, you know, where do you want to go? Where have you traveled? You know, if you could live anywhere. They just assume that if someone's living in Arkansas, that you would, of course, want to live somewhere else or go somewhere else. And he's just like, I don't know, I'm pretty happy living in Arkansas. And it's kind of interesting that he can say that, like, after not having experience living other places. But for me, I understand where those people are coming from, because before I got out of Arkansas, you know, I had this thought of like, well, I want to live other places. I want to experience all these things and see the world. And I just never, if you asked me in high school or early college, like if I would think that I would end up back in Arkansas, I would have said, no, I'm going to live somewhere else, you know, somewhere more exciting, things like that. But after I did live other places, and traveled a lot and saw a lot of things, like once I started getting into my 30s, like the thought of living in Arkansas wasn't so bad. I think there's definitely that like grass is always greener sort of thing, like with the job, with the corporate job, or with, you know, moving somewhere else or living somewhere else. You think that, you know, going somewhere else or doing something different is going to change things, but it's not always, you know, better. And you know, traveling and doing all that led for me, I still would like to travel some more whenever I'm done with my PhD, but I think like I'm fine living in Arkansas as long as things don't get too crazy, like politically going forward. but yeah, I guess that is one thing I do worry about a little bit kind of going forward, because in terms of control, because, you know, I feel like, well, maybe this is getting too much, but I am getting a little bit worried about like women's rights right now, which I never would have thought in my life. Like, I only would have thought that things would have gotten better, but I don't know, with these next two elections, I think I'm not sure how things are going to go, honestly. And so, I mean, I would love to stay here. But I honestly, I never thought that certain things would happen, and things have happened. And so now I just don't know. So that would take control away from me. And so if that happens, if I feel like I don't have like control over certain things because of like the politics of the state or the country, I may, sorry, my cat's on my desk. Okay, I guess I need to finish, but something like that where I don't feel like I do have control over things, I may move to somewhere else where I could have more control. But I'm gonna give it like 2 more years and see what happens. But anyway, that's what I have for that. I will be back tomorrow with day 93.